They were told Americans would work them to death in brutal labor camps. But when 5,000 German soldiers arrived at Camp Concordia, Kansas in February 1943, they heard something that made them think their captors had lost their minds. The American commander stood before them and announced plans to build a swimming pool. Not for the guards, not for the officers, but for the prisoners themselves. Klaus Hartmann, a former Wehrmacht corporal from Munich, turned to his friend and whispered, "They're trying to mock us. This is some kind of sick joke." Another prisoner laughed bitterly. "A swimming pool? In a prison camp? These Americans are either cruel or crazy." They expected cruelty. They expected hard labor and starvation. What they did not expect was this: an enemy so wealthy, so powerful, that they could afford to treat prisoners better than Germany had treated its own soldiers. If you enjoy learning about hidden World War II stories that challenge everything you thought you knew, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating historical accounts. The train that brought them across America was nothing like the cramped cattle cars they had imagined. The boxcars were heated. Guards handed out blankets. When the train stopped at stations, curious American children pressed their faces against windows, staring at the enemy soldiers like they were zoo animals. Klaus pressed his face against the cold glass, watching the American countryside roll past. Endless fields stretched to the horizon. Farmhouses stood intact, untouched by bombs. Towns sparkled with electric lights. There were no ruins, no craters, no skeletal buildings reaching toward the sky like broken teeth. "Where are the bombed cities?" asked Johann, a young soldier from Hamburg who had spent his last months in Germany sleeping in rubble. "Where is the destruction?" The answer was simple and terrifying. There was none. America had sent millions of soldiers overseas, had built thousands of tanks and planes and ships, and yet the homeland remained completely untouched. The contrast was staggering. When they finally arrived at Camp Concordia, the prisoners stepped off the train into the bitter Kansas cold. But even in winter, the camp looked nothing like they had imagined. The barracks were freshly painted. Electric lights glowed in every building. An American flag snapped in the wind above neat rows of buildings that looked more like a military base than a prison. The prisoners were lined up for processing. They stood in the cold, shoulders hunched, waiting for the inevitable brutality. Instead, American guards in clean uniforms checked their names against lists. Medical officers examined them for injuries and illnesses. No one shouted, no one struck them. Everything moved with calm, organized efficiency. Klaus watched an American sergeant speak to the German officer in charge. The American's tone was firm, but not cruel. There was no hatred in his eyes, only a kind of weary professionalism. It was unsettling. Where was the rage? Where was the revenge? "They hate us," Johann whispered. "They must. We killed their friends." "If they hate us," Klaus replied, "they hide it well." The smell hit them before they saw the source. Coffee. Real coffee, rich and dark, not the bitter acorn substitute they had choked down for years. And something else. Bacon. The scent of frying meat drifted from the mess hall, and stomachs that had learned to expect nothing suddenly roared with desperate hunger. Before the meal came the showers. The prisoners were ordered to strip and hand over their filthy uniforms. Some tensed, remembering the propaganda stories of gas chambers disguised as showers. But the guards simply pointed them toward tiled rooms where steam rose in clouds. Hot water. Not lukewarm, not cold, but actually hot. It poured from the shower heads in generous streams. Klaus stood under the spray, feeling months of grime and lice wash away. Around him, other men stood frozen in disbelief before finally relaxing into the warmth. They were given soap, real soap, white bars that lathered thick and smelled clean. Not the gray, gritty substitute they had used in Germany, if they had soap at all. Klaus rubbed the bar between his hands, watching the foam build, and felt something crack inside his chest. This simple luxury, denied for so long, felt almost obscene in its abundance. After the showers, they received clean clothes, not prison uniforms, but regular work clothes. Sturdy pants, warm shirts, thick socks without holes. Klaus pulled on the clothes, feeling the fabric against his clean skin, and realized he had forgotten what it felt like to be properly dressed. Johann stood next to him, running his fingers through his wet hair. "This makes no sense," he said quietly. "Why would they give us this?" Klaus had no answer. The Reich had taught them that Americans were soft, decadent, weak. But this did not feel like weakness. This felt like something else entirely. Something they did not yet have words for. The mess hall doors swung open and the prisoners filed inside. Long tables stretched the length of the room. The smell was overwhelming. Klaus felt his mouth water uncontrollably. American cooks in white aprons stood behind serving counters. They were not prisoners. They were paid workers, and they served the German prisoners the same food they served American soldiers. This fact would take days to fully understand. Klaus held out his tray. The cook, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, dropped a thick slice of meatloaf onto his plate, then mashed potatoes, white and fluffy, green beans swimming in butter, a slice of white bread, soft as cloud, and coffee, a full mug of real coffee. Klaus carried his tray to a table, set it down, and simply stared. Beside him, Johann's hands shook as he picked up his fork. Around them, 5,000 German soldiers sat in stunned silence, looking at more food than they had seen in months. "Is it poisoned?" someone whispered. "Don't be stupid," another replied. "Why poison us when they could just shoot us?" Klaus cut into the meatloaf. The meat was tender, seasoned with herbs he did not recognize. He put the fork in his mouth and closed his eyes. For years he had eaten watery soup and stale bread. The Wehrmacht rations had been thin even before the war turned against Germany. In the final months, soldiers survived on whatever they could scavenge. Now, in an enemy prison camp, he was eating better than he had ever eaten in the German army. He looked around the mess hall and saw the same realization dawning on every face. Some men ate slowly, savoring each bite. Others devoured their food like starving animals, years of hunger breaking through all dignity. A few wept openly, tears running down their faces as they chewed. Johann ate his mashed potatoes and said nothing, but Klaus saw his friend's jaw working, saw him swallow hard against emotion. They had been prepared for cruelty. They had been ready for hunger and cold and brutality. This kindness was harder to bear. An American guard walked through the mess hall, hands clasped behind his back. He was young, probably no older than Klaus himself. He glanced at the prisoners without apparent hatred or disgust, just watchfulness. Klaus wanted to ask him why. Why feed your enemies? Why give them hot showers and clean clothes? Why treat them like human beings when you have every right to treat them like animals? But he did not speak. He simply ate and tried to understand. After the meal, they were shown to their barracks. Klaus had expected packed, filthy rooms. Instead, he found rows of bunk beds with real mattresses. Not straw pallets, but actual mattresses with springs. Each bed had 2 wool blankets, thick and warm. The barracks had heat. A coal stove sat in the center of the room, its fire already burning. Light bulbs hung from the ceiling, powered by electricity that seemed limitless. In Germany, electricity had been rationed, lights turned off to save power. Here, the Americans lit every building as if energy cost nothing. Klaus chose a lower bunk and sat down carefully, as if the bed might disappear. The mattress gave slightly under his weight. He pressed his hand into it, feeling the springs compress. A real bed, in a prison camp. Johann climbed onto the bunk above him. "Klaus," he said softly, "what is happening?" "I don't know. They feed us, they give us beds, they heat our barracks." Johann's voice dropped to a whisper. "Are we even prisoners?" Klaus did not answer. He lay back on his mattress and stared at the ceiling. Outside, the Kansas wind howled, but inside he was warm, fed, and clean for the first time in years. That night, as the barracks grew quiet, Klaus wrote a letter to his mother in Munich. He described the food, the beds, the hot showers. Then he stopped, pen hovering over paper. How could he tell her he was living better as a prisoner than she was as a free woman in Germany? How could he write that the enemy fed him while she starved in the ruins of their city? He folded the letter and put it away. Some truths were too painful to share. The days settled into a rhythm. Wake at 6, breakfast at 6:30, work detail at 7. The work was not backbreaking. Some prisoners worked in camp kitchens, peeling potatoes and washing dishes. Others maintained the grounds, sweeping paths and painting buildings. A group was assigned to help local farmers harvest wheat, and they were paid in camp scrip for their labor. Paid for working. As prisoners, Klaus was assigned to the carpentry shop, where prisoners repaired furniture and built shelves. The American supervisor, a weathered man named Jenkins, showed them how to use power saws and electric drills, tools that most German workers would never see. Here they were standard equipment. "You break it, we fix it," Jenkins said simply. "You do good work, you get more pay." The camp operated on a system that made no sense to men raised under National Socialism. Prisoners could earn extra scrip through good behavior and hard work. They could spend this scrip at the camp canteen, a small store stocked with cigarettes, chocolate, soap, writing paper, and even books. The first time Klaus stepped into the canteen, he stood frozen in the doorway. Shelves lined the walls, packed with goods that had vanished from German stores years ago. Hershey bars, Lucky Strike cigarettes, Colgate toothpaste, Gillette razors. Johann picked up a chocolate bar with shaking hands. "How much?" 5 cents scrip, the American clerk said. 5 cents. Less than an hour's work. Johann bought 2 bars and walked out in a daze. They sat outside the canteen in the spring sunshine, unwrapping the chocolate. Klaus bit into his bar and closed his eyes. Sweet, smooth, rich. He had not tasted chocolate since 1941. "This is wrong?" Johann said suddenly. "What?" "All of this. The food, the chocolate, the beds." Johann's voice was tight. "We are prisoners. We should be suffering. Instead, we're eating chocolate while our families starve." Klaus had no answer. The contradiction gnawed at him constantly. The letters arrived in batches, delayed by weeks, censored by military officials, but they arrived. Klaus read his mother's words and felt his chest tighten. "We live in the cellar now. The apartment building is gone. Your sister coughs all night from the dust. We boil potato peels for soup. Mrs. Schmidt's son died in Russia. If you can send anything, please do. Klaus folded the letter with trembling hands. He looked at the half-eaten Hershey bar on his bunk, at his clean clothes, at the electric light burning overhead. Around him, other prisoners read their own letters. One man sat with his head in his hands, shoulders shaking. Another crumpled his letter and threw it across the room. A third read his letter 3 times, lips moving silently, as if repetition might change the words. Johann received a letter from his girlfriend in Hamburg. The city had been bombed again. She was living in a church basement with 40 other people. They had 1 blanket per family. No heat, no electricity. Soup kitchens opened twice a day when they had food. Johann read the letter aloud, his voice flat. When he finished, he looked at Klaus. We get 3 meals a day, hot water, warm beds, while they freeze and starve. Yes. It should be the other way around. Yes. They sat in silence. Outside, American guards played baseball on a dirt field, their laughter carrying through the spring air. The sound was jarring. Laughter. In a prison camp, while Europe burned. Not all Americans were friendly, but many were simply professional. They did their jobs, followed their orders, and treated the prisoners with basic dignity. Some went further. One day, Klaus was working in the carpentry shop when Jenkins approached him with a photograph. "That's my son," he said. The photo showed a young man in an American uniform, smiling at the camera. "He's in France," Jenkins continued, "fighting your people." Klaus did not know what to say. He nodded carefully. Jenkins took the photo back. "I hope he comes home. I hope your people don't kill him." He said it without anger, just as a statement of fact. Then he handed Klaus a stick of gum. "Break's over. Back to work." Another guard, a young man named Miller, liked to practice his terrible German on the prisoners. He would butcher simple phrases, and the prisoners would correct him, half amused, half baffled that an enemy soldier wanted to learn their language. "Why do you want to speak German?" Johann asked him once. Miller shrugged. "My grandmother was from Germany, came over in 1910. Figured I should learn." The casual revelation stunned them. This American guard had German blood. His grandmother might have known their grandfathers. In another world, they might have been cousins. The war suddenly felt absurd. On Sundays, the camp showed American movies in the recreation hall. Prisoners could attend if they wanted. Klaus went once, curious. The film was a Western, cowboys and Indians, all in English he could barely understand. But what struck him was not the movie. It was the theater itself. Rows of chairs, a real projector, music through speakers, all for prisoners. The Americans built a movie theater for their enemies. The wealth required to do such things was incomprehensible. In May 1943, 3 months after their arrival, the prisoners were assembled in the main yard. The camp commander, a colonel named Harrison, stood on a platform with an interpreter. "Gentlemen," the interpreter translated, "the summer will be hot. Kansas summers are brutal. Therefore, we are constructing a swimming pool for recreational use." Silence. 5,000 men stood perfectly still, trying to process what they had just heard. Klaus looked at Johann. Johann looked back, eyes wide. A swimming pool for prisoners. Someone behind Klaus laughed, not with joy, but with the kind of laughter that comes when reality becomes too strange to bear. "This is madness," Johann whispered. "They must be mocking us." But the commander continued. "Construction begins next week. We are also expanding the athletic fields. Volleyball and soccer tournaments will be organized. A camp newspaper will be started, written and printed by prisoners. Education classes will be available for those who wish to learn English or trade skills." The interpreter finished. Colonel Harrison nodded to the crowd and walked away. The prisoners dispersed slowly, murmuring among themselves. Klaus walked back to his barrack in a daze. Johann walked beside him, shaking his head. "A swimming pool," Johann said. "A newspaper. Soccer tournaments." He stopped walking. "Klaus, what kind of prison camp is this?" Klaus had been asking himself the same question for months. Now finally he was beginning to understand. This was not about kindness. This was about something much bigger. "It's not a prison camp," he said quietly. "It's a demonstration." Johann frowned. "A demonstration of what?" "Power." Klaus sat down on the barrack steps. "They're not being kind. They're showing us how rich they are. How powerful. They're saying, look, we can afford to treat our enemies better than you treated your own people. We can build swimming pools in prison camps while your cities burn. That's how much stronger we are than you." Johann sat down beside him, and for a long time neither spoke. The swimming pool was not a joke. Within days, American engineers arrived with equipment. Bulldozers carved a rectangular pit in the ground. Cement trucks poured concrete. Prisoners watched the construction in disbelief. Klaus was assigned to help with the work. He mixed cement, carried lumber, held measurements. The Americans directed the project with the same efficiency they brought to everything. No wasted motion, no wasted materials, just smooth, unstoppable progress. Jenkins stood beside Klaus one day, watching the concrete being poured. "You boys seem surprised," he said. Klaus chose his words carefully. "In Germany, we do not build swimming pools for prisoners." Jenkins grunted. "This ain't Germany. Besides, Geneva Convention says we gotta treat you right. Says you get recreation, exercise, entertainment." He spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Some folks back home think we're too soft on you, but the colonel follows the rules." "The rules," Klaus repeated. The concept was almost alien. Germany had rules too once. Then the rules changed, then they disappeared. "Yeah, the rules." Jenkins looked at him. "Your people didn't follow the rules. That's why you lost." Klaus said nothing. What could he say? The man was right. By July, the pool was finished. 25 meters long, filled with clear water pumped from deep wells, diving boards at one end, a concrete deck around the perimeter, changing rooms with showers. The prisoners stood at the edge, staring down at the water. Some were from landlocked towns and had never learned to swim. Others had swum in rivers and lakes as boys. But none had ever seen anything like this. "Well?" an American guard called out. "What are you waiting for?" Slowly, carefully, as if the water might vanish, the first prisoner climbed down the ladder, then another, then a dozen more. Soon the pool was full of German soldiers, laughing and splashing like children. Klaus floated on his back, staring up at the Kansas sky. The water was cool against his skin. The sun was warm on his face. In this moment, the war felt like a distant dream. But the guilt never fully left. Even here, even now, he thought of his mother in her cellar, of his sister coughing in the dust, of all the people back home who would never know such comfort. The swimming pool became a symbol, not of American kindness, but of American abundance. The prisoners began to understand that everything they had been taught about the enemy was wrong. Nazi propaganda had painted Americans as weak and decadent, obsessed with luxury and comfort, unable to fight a real war. But the prisoners now saw the truth. America's strength came precisely from that abundance. A nation so wealthy it could build swimming pools for prisoners could also build unlimited tanks, planes, and ships. Germany had thrown everything into the war. Every resource, every life, every scrap of metal, and it still was not enough. America had barely tried, and Germany was losing. Klaus sat in the recreation hall one evening, writing another letter he would never send. He wrote about the swimming pool, about the chocolate, about the electric lights that never went out. Then he wrote something else. "We were told Americans were our inferiors, weak and soft, but I have seen their power now, and it is terrifying. Not because they are cruel, but because they are so strong they can afford to be kind. They feed us better than our own army fed us. They treat us better than our own government treated us. And they do it without effort, as if resources are infinite. How do you fight an enemy like that? How did we ever think we could win?" He folded the letter and burned it in the stove. Some truths were too dangerous to write down. The barracks became a place of quiet debate. Prisoners argued late into the night about what they had seen and what it meant. Some remained loyal to the Reich. They insisted the war could still be won, that secret weapons would turn the tide, that America's wealth was an illusion. These men refused to swim in the pool. They refused to watch American movies. They clung to their beliefs because the alternative was too painful. Others, like Klaus, could not ignore reality anymore. They had eaten American food, worn American clothes, slept in American beds. They had seen American power up close. The propaganda crumbled under the weight of direct experience. "Do you still believe we can win?" Klaus asked Johann one night. Johann was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "No." "Do you think we ever could have won?" "No." They lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the camp. Someone was playing harmonica in another barracks. An American radio played jazz music in the guard station, the normal sounds of life. "Then what was it all for?" Johann asked. Klaus had no answer. Millions dead, cities destroyed, Europe in ruins. And for what? For a dream of empire that was doomed from the start? "I don't want to go back," Johann whispered. "When the war ends, I don't want to go back to Germany." Klaus understood. What was there to go back to? Rubble and starvation. A defeated nation under occupation? Here at least they had food and shelter. Here they were treated like humans. The thought was shameful, but it was also true. One day the camp showed a documentary film about American industry. The prisoners watched footage of factories stretching for miles, assembly lines producing tanks and planes by the thousands, ships launched every few days. The numbers were staggering. After the film, Klaus walked outside and sat by the swimming pool. The water was still, reflecting the evening sky. He thought about everything he had seen. Germany had built its war machine through force. through slave labor and conquered resources, through cruelty and fear, and it had failed. America had built its war machine through wealth, through voluntary labor and vast resources, through organization and efficiency, and it had succeeded. The swimming pool was not kindness. It was a demonstration of surplus power. America could afford to treat its enemies well because it had so much excess that even generosity cost nothing. Jenkins had said it, "We follow the rules." And that was the key. America followed rules because it could afford to. It did not need to cheat or steal or brutalize because it had enough. Enough food, enough materials, enough everything. Germany had never had enough. The war was fought from desperation from the beginning. The cruelty was not strength. It was weakness wearing a mask. Klaus looked down at his reflection in the pool water. He barely recognized himself. He had gained weight. His face had filled out. He looked healthy, almost happy. The enemy had done this. The enemy had made him whole again, and that realization cut deeper than any weapon. In August 1943, the camp organized a soccer tournament. Teams were formed, brackets created, and prizes offered. The Americans set up bleachers for spectators. They even hired a German-speaking announcer. Klaus played midfielder for his barracks team. Johann played defense. They had not played soccer since before the war, but the muscle memory returned quickly. The final match drew hundreds of spectators. Prisoners cheered and shouted. American guards watched from the sidelines, some even calling out encouragement. The scene was surreal, a soccer game in a prison camp, with enemies cheering alongside each other. Klaus's team won 3-2. They celebrated like they had won the World Cup, hugging and laughing and shouting. For a moment, the war did not exist. For a moment, they were just young men playing a game. Afterward, as the sun set, Klaus sat alone by the swimming pool. His legs ached pleasantly from the game. His jersey was soaked with sweat. He felt more alive than he had in years. Johann found him there. He sat down beside Klaus without speaking. Finally, Klaus said, "Do you remember what they told us? About Americans? That they were weak, decadent, unfit to fight. And do you believe that now?" Johann laughed bitterly. "They built us a swimming pool, in a prison camp, while fighting a war on 2 continents. No, I don't think they're weak." Klaus looked out at the pool, at the clear water reflecting the darkening sky. "Everything we believed was a lie." "Yes." "Germany will lose." "Yes." "And when we go back, we will have to rebuild everything from nothing." Johann nodded slowly. "If we go back." They sat in silence as the stars came out. Around them, the camp settled into its evening routine. Lights came on in the barracks. The smell of dinner drifted from the mess hall. The sounds of life continued, steady and unbreakable. Klaus thought about the swimming pool, about the chocolate and the hot showers and the soccer tournaments, about every small comfort that had been given to them without hesitation. The Americans had not tried to convert them, had not lectured them about democracy, had simply shown them through actions rather than words what a wealthy, organized society looked like. And that was the most devastating weapon of all. Not cruelty, not revenge, but the simple, undeniable demonstration of superior power through casual abundance. "Klaus," Johann said softly, "when this is over, whatever happens, promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll remember this, the swimming pool, the kindness. Promise you'll tell people what really happened here." Klaus nodded. "I promise." They shook hands, formally, like sealing a contract. And in that moment something shifted. They were no longer soldiers of the Reich. They were simply 2 young men trying to understand a world that had revealed itself to be far more complex than they had ever imagined. The war in Europe ended in May 1945. News reached the camp slowly. Hitler was dead. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. The Reich that was supposed to last 1,000 years had collapsed after 12. The prisoners received the news with mixed emotions. Relief that the killing had stopped, fear about what came next, and guilt. Always guilt. They had been safe in America while their families suffered. They had eaten well while their countrymen starved. They had swum in pools while cities burned. How could they face the people they had left behind? Repatriation would not begin immediately. The camps would remain operational for months, even years, as the logistics of returning millions of prisoners were worked out. Some prisoners would stay until 1946, a few even longer. Klaus and Johann both applied for work programs that would keep them in America longer. They were not ready to return. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. Klaus returned to Germany in the spring of 1946. The journey was the reverse of his arrival. Train across America, ship across the Atlantic. Arrival in a European port. But Germany was not the country he had left. Munich was a wasteland. Entire neighborhoods had been erased. The streets he remembered were gone, replaced by rubble and ruins. The city looked like the surface of the moon. His mother's apartment building was gone. He found her in a displaced persons camp, living in a tent with his sister. When she saw him, she wept. But her tears were complicated. joy at his survival, anger at his absence, resentment that he looked so healthy while she looked like a skeleton. "You were eating chocolate, she said, reading his letters, "while we starved." He could not deny it. He could only bow his head. But slowly, painfully, they rebuilt. Klaus used the carpentry skills he had learned in America to find work. He helped reconstruct buildings. He taught other Germans the efficient American methods he had observed. And he told people about the swimming pool, about the abundance, about the power of a nation that could afford to be generous even to its enemies. Many did not believe him. A swimming pool for prisoners? Impossible. But others understood. They understood that Germany had lost not just because of military defeat, but because they had challenged an enemy with resources beyond imagination. An enemy that could fight a two-front war while building swimming pools for prisoners. Years later, Klaus married. He had children. He built a life in the new West Germany. He worked hard, saved money, and tried to forget the war. But he never forgot the swimming pool. When his son was 10 years old, Klaus took him to the municipal swimming pool in Munich. As they stood at the edge, his son asked, "Did you ever swim when you were a soldier?" Klaus told him the story, about Kansas, about the Americans, about the pool they built for their prisoners. His son listened with wide eyes. "But why?" he asked. "Why would they do that?" Klaus thought about how to answer. Finally he said, "Because they could. Because they had so much that even giving to their enemies cost them nothing. That was their power, not cruelty, not hatred, but wealth, abundance. They showed us that violence was not the only form of strength." "Did you hate them?" his son asked. "I tried to, but it's hard to hate someone who treats you better than your own leaders did." His son thought about this. Then he jumped into the water, laughing. Klaus watched him swim. He thought about another pool, in another time. He thought about Johann, who had stayed in America and never returned. He thought about all the prisoners who had their worldview shattered by the simple act of unexpected generosity. The war had taught him many lessons, but the most important one was this: true power does not need to be cruel. True power can afford to be kind. And that kindness, that casual demonstration of abundance, was more devastating than any weapon. And so the swimming pool became more than a place to swim. It became proof that wealth, not cruelty, is the foundation of real power. For those German prisoners, the cool water and summer sunshine became symbols of a contradiction they could not escape. They were the enemy, and yet they were treated with dignity. They were prisoners, and yet they lived better than they had as free men. The swimming pool at Camp Concordia was filled in decades ago. The barracks are gone. The camp itself is a distant memory. But the lesson remains. America won World War II not just through military might, but through sheer abundance, through the ability to wage total war while maintaining prosperity at home, through the capacity to treat prisoners with dignity while simultaneously producing more weapons than the Axis could comprehend. Klaus lived to be 87 years old. In his final interview, recorded by his granddaughter, he said this: "They built us a swimming pool. Can you imagine? We were their enemies, and they built us a swimming pool. That's when I knew Germany had lost. Not when we surrendered, not when Hitler died, but when I saw that pool. Because I understood then that we were fighting an enemy who could afford to be kind. And you cannot defeat kindness backed by unlimited resources. You cannot win against generosity that costs nothing. The cruelty Germany showed was weakness pretending to be strength. The kindness America showed was strength so great it did not need to pretend. That is the story worth remembering. Not just as a curiosity of history, but as a lesson about power, wealth, and what it means to win without becoming monsters ourselves. If you found this story meaningful and want to learn more about the hidden truths of World War II, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss these powerful historical accounts. These stories, though buried in time, still speak to us today about humanity, power, and the complex nature of war. Thank you for watching.